Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daniela Fayer. I'm the group publisher at GovExec for the defense segment, and it's my pleasure to have a conversation here with David Rouse. He leads the Verizon's Department of Defense and National Security Global Sales Organization. And I just want to start off by thanking you and all of the industry supporters for being with us today, because it's a lofty conversation that we have here at Defense One. The editorial team has a great proclivity for lining up very influential speakers and talking about the very big picture. But I think it's really important to hear from industry, to hear the perspective, especially because this event is about buying and acquisition. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about your background. You are a telecom engineer by education and have loads of it. And you have been in many roles with industry, but you started your career at DISA, yes, correct? Yes. And at Verizon, you predominantly serve the DoD market segment, so you know a lot about it. And I thought I would ask you to share with everyone here what your role is right now and how you interact with them.
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's wonderful to see everyone here. So. Currently I lead Verizon's Defense and National Security segment, which encompasses US DoD, UK MOD, NATO, UN. We've got global responsibility for everything in the Verizon portfolio. So my background, as you mentioned, college as an engineer, worked with DISA for several years. First week on the job was finding a supply cabinet, and the second week on the job was Saddam Hussein rolling into Kuwait. So it changed very quickly. Then I moved into industry, stayed in the engineering role for quite a while. But then I've worked predominantly federal, and within that predominantly DoD, but I have done some work in healthcare and public utilities, financial institutions. And so I feel, fairly diverse background from both the engineering as well as sales and sales leadership roles.
All right, great. So you've got a perspective here that I think people will be interested in hearing about. I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the types of challenges that you think the DoD has in procuring specific kinds of technology. And perhaps that has been in the past, but also today, because we've heard about that.
Sure. I think the previous segment hit on a lot of key things. To me, it's one thing to get access to technology. Like when I was at DISA, we had a lab and played with a lot of neat stuff. But getting that out of the lab and into the DoD and having a mission impacting capability at scale is where we see some challenges. And I think it ties to certain acquisition processes, but then also how do you synchronize the budgeting process? So I think looking historically, I think maybe a key example is the last 10, 12 years that we've been collectively, government and industry, working our way through TDM elimination and transformation of voice services. Terry Takai signed out the DoD UC Master Plan in 2011, which laid out a lot of responsibilities, but it's a plan, it's not a funding document. And so then we get into these scenarios where navigating Title 10 demarcs between DISA's responsibility and MILDEP responsibility, and then, how do we synchronize all these different moving parts of what's truly a pretty complex architecture. And, so we've had a lot of, success in certain areas as a collective, but then there's other areas where we're still, trying to get certain elements of the infrastructure, migrated. And one of the things I've learned, talking with the government customers is words matter. So if I say transform, that can steer you down a certain path from a budgeting and acquisition perspective. Or if I say repair and replace, maybe I'm going down a different color of money and down a different acquisition path. So it's more of an art than a science, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's been in the past, but do you think that's changing? Do you think it's getting more complex, or is it still the same problem?
Well, I think that the importance is that understanding the architecture really from layer 0 all the way up into the application space is critically important. So we can talk a lot about, so at Verizon, I mean, our one of our focus areas is deploying 5G. We've dealt with, wireless services to the public and to enterprise and government customers alike for the last couple decades. 5G is different in that I need a much denser network. So this is starting to kind of come back to some of the UC master plan challenges, in that what I could do in a previous generation of cellular technology, I may be able to address certain coverage issues without necessarily having to be on the base. In 5G, where I need a much denser network in terms of cell sites, small cells, I need access to the base, and not only access to the base, I need fiber. And so if that layer 0, that inside-outside plant, hasn't been migrated off of paper-wrapped copper in some cases, and having that fiber infrastructure robust and in place where it's needed, then it can limit or prohibit some of these newer technologies of being available at the point of need. So I think that's an area that's has been a challenge, and it's a limiting factor in what we're trying to advance as far as new capabilities as well.
Okay, so that's 5G. Are there other examples of technologies, that, like, give us some examples of technologies and how they can apply to various DoD missions?
So I think, if we get to really what's the art of the possible versus, what's kind of tripping us up, at least from what we're seeing, I think that, the area around, AR, VR, digital twin environments is an example where we can look at, say, maintenance and operations type environments, where instead of training people in a classroom with a 3-ring binder and maybe some videos, you can actually go into, a digital twin environment of, say, a ship or a landing gear for aircraft or whatever. And you can actually walk around, you can see it. There can be notes, annotations from the trainers. And one of the things, we've talked about with customers is how to leverage that so that, a particular scenario is coming up. You can refresh your training in a more hands-on environment. And then, when that asset, let's say a ship's coming in, and here's what's on the punch list, you've actually done it in this digital twin environment, and now you're able to execute much more crisply, and return to service for that asset can be compressed. So I think that's a pretty exciting space. And anything else around simulation and those types of AR, VR scenarios, it's one of the things that we look to showcase in some of our innovation centers, because it's visual, so people can really kind of see what's going on with the technology.
Well, it's great to see industry bringing, commercial applications, to the DoD so that they can take advantage of them. I think I read that ChatGPT is had its first birthday. Is that possible? I feel like it seems like it's 30 years old, not 1 year old. But that's a big buzzword right now. Are there any applications in your world there for the DoD?
Well, so 2 things there. One is, it's amazing that it's only been a year. It seems like it's been longer. But I think it comes back to, again, the previous segment and some of our earlier comments about how to synchronize the POM cycle with, the acquisition processes and so forth. I mean, what government program manager was making POM submissions for AI, 3, 4, 5 years ago? Especially something at scale. I'm sure folks in the research and development community, probably laugh at us right now, but the scale side of it is the challenge, I think. So AI, I think for us is, how can we be more efficient in what we do, like things like around predictive maintenance, condition-based maintenance, not only of our capabilities and our assets, but are there capabilities that we can extend to our customers through some of the solutions we provide? I think is an area that is pretty exciting. And also, being a service provider, calls to care, things like that. How can we make the customer experience, whether it's the consumer side of the equation or the business and government side of the equation, how can we make that tier 0 capabilities more robust and more impactful? And when a customer does have to go to tier 1 or tier 2, how can we accelerate the response and the resolution of issues? So I think those are a couple areas where the maintenance and the operations of our network and our services, and then the support infrastructure behind them are a couple areas that I see.
So those are exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the big question that I think I want to know, and I'm hoping others will too, is how do you help the military start to quickly and efficiently procure these cool new offerings? Like we're talking about buying here, we're talking about
Sure.
the acquisition process. What can we do? What can you tell them about getting it done quickly?
Well, so I think we've seen, so one area is like OTAs. We've been involved in some of those, and again, that's kind of more experimentation or prototype type capabilities. But it does create an opportunity for folks to kick tires and look under the hood. But it does continue to provide the challenge of doing it at scale, which I think is still a little bit of the gap. Is how do we, we've been in kind of from the telco side of this world, we've been in a pretty interesting period here, just before COVID and up to now, where we've had a lot of, and it wasn't by design, but we've had a lot of contract vehicles that have really compressed into a very fairly tight window for transitioning. So networks to EIS and other contracts like that. So I feel like there's been a lot of focus on, hey, we just need to move from A to B versus how do we, in that transition, how do we leverage the latest and greatest technologies? Like we just need to shut this contract down, start this one. And then, so there's this protracted period of time of executing on the transitions, and it's kind of delaying some of the, the newer capabilities that could be brought to bear. Some customers are navigating that, more effectively than others, I would say. But it is an area that I think, how do we take those new contract vehicles once we get past the transitions and then start to really bring new capabilities? Technology insertion clauses help, but then it's also back to the funding there to support it. So
it sounds to me like we're finding ways, right? But there's a long way to go.
There's a lot of creativity, figuring out how to navigate it. But we've heard from some of the government leaders, some of the conferences I go to about, can we get into, multi-year funding? Can we change the color of money? Because sometimes, you have the best of intention and I want to do X in 3 years, and you go down a path and then you end up with a certain color of money, which, drives you down a certain acquisition. But then by the time that capability is available, is that still the right direction? And can you pivot? And sometimes you can't. So, I think if there was a little more flexibility, I guess, around the budgeting and the acquisition process, then industry and government could pivot into some new areas versus trying to figure out how do I shoehorn it into this box.
Obstacle course, always.
Yeah,
That's why we're here, to have this conversation. David, thank you so much for spending time with us. I really appreciate it, and we appreciate your support here at Defense One.
Thank you.